Hello everyone. Today we are gonna explain how the Graph Mapper works. Graph Mapper is a very useful component of Grasshopper, and for that we're gonna create a vase like this one, and we're gonna see why it is so useful. So I'm gonna start by opening Grasshopper, and the Graph Mapper. First, I'm gonna divide this tutorial in maybe 3 or 4 parts, so it doesn't become too tedious. And then we are, by the end we're gonna have the full vase. Okay, so the Graph Mapper, we can find it here in params, and we go to input, and here we have the Graph Mapper. Okay. And for that, the first thing, I'm gonna start creating the base of this vase, and then we're gonna explain how the Graph Mapper works and what we can use it with. So to create the vase, I'm gonna use a line. I'm gonna create a vertical line and then divide it. The vertical line, it's gonna be created with the line SDL component. And this component needs a start, and for the start I'm just gonna use 0.0. I'm just gonna construct a point in 0x, 0y, 0z coordinates, and it's just gonna go vertically, okay, along the z axis. It already has by default the direction on the z axis. So what I'm going to do next is create a slider to control the length. And for that, I'm going to create a slider that goes maybe from 50 until 1000. And then I'm going to connect it to the length. As we continue, we're going to start hiding parts. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a bit. And that should be okay, perfectly. So as we said, we're gonna divide this line, and for that we have a very useful component that it's called divide curve. And this component, what it does is divides the curve into as many parts as we want. It already has a default count or a set of divisions. We're going to create a slider to control that it will go maybe from 10 until, let's say, 50. And I'm going to connect it there. And that way we can divide this curve. And in these points that we are creating along this line, we're going to put the circles. Okay. So I'm just gonna drag this, and I'm gonna create a circle, the most basic one. Okay, it already has a default plane that is parallel to X and Y plane, and then we will have to set up the radius. So for the points, I'm gonna put this here, and then I'm gonna turn everything off. But the circles, okay, the circles are there. The thing is that the scale we are using, it's very small. I mean, it's the line is too big for the circles. The circles already have a radius, a default radius that it's 1. So if we want to see them, we are gonna, let's create a slider that goes maybe from 50 until 500 maybe. And we can connect to the radius, and now we can start seeing them. Okay, so what we are going to do to create the vase or the basis of the vase is that we're going to control the radius with the Graph Mapper. Okay, so how does the Graph Mapper works? So to use the Graph Mapper, I recommend, well, we're always going to use the range component, okay? That the range component, I'm going to bring it here. What it does, I'm actually going to drag this component here so you can see which component is which, and you can create the algorithm yourself. And okay, so the range component, what it does, it creates a list of numbers that go in between a domain, okay, between two limits that by default this domain is between 0 and 1, and then it has an amount of divisions, okay, so that list is going to be longer or shorter depending on what we put on the steps. So for instance, what I'm going to do is grab a panel so we can see what's coming out of the range. And then I'm going to create a slider. Okay, so now we have a list of 11 components in between 0 and 1. We could change that those limits, okay, by changing the domain. But for the graph mapper, we are going to keep it as it is. Okay, it's going to make it much easier, and I'm going to show you how. And then the steps, we're going to, let's, for instance, copy this slider. And if we connect it to the steps of the range, okay, we can see that we have a longer or shorter list. Basically, we have more or less divisions in between 0 and 1. Okay, so what we're going to do is connect the output of the range component to the input of the graph mapper. Okay, and I'm gonna put this on 10, or I'm actually gonna, yeah, I'm gonna put this on 10. Okay, so if we have an easier to see list or easier to interpret. And then I'm gonna put another panel on the output of the graph mapper to understand what's coming out of it. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit so we can compare the two lists. Here I'm gonna connect it. And as we can see, both lists are exactly the same, okay? So, what does the graph mapper will do? Now it isn't doing anything because we haven't set it up yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click on the graph mapper and then go to graph types. And here we have a number of graphs that we can set up on this graph mapper, on this component, and depending on which one we choose, we will have a result. Let's start with the linear, which is, I believe, the easiest. Okay, we still have the same list in the input and the output. And what is happening is that, or what the graph mapper does, is that it creates or it spreads the input of the list along the x-axis, okay, on the horizontal axis. So we have 0, 0.1, 0.2, and so on. And what it does, it's project, or the result is going to be the corresponding coordinate, or component on the y-axis, right, for that graph. Okay, so if we project a certain value on the x-axis, okay, what we are gonna get is what corresponds for this value depending on this graph, on the y-axis. As this is a straight line, okay, 45 degrees line, okay, we can see that the for the 0.1 on x corresponds exactly the same value on y, and so on. But I'm gonna delete this. Once we drag this graph until these little dots, okay, our list starts changing. Our output list starts changing. For example, if we put it nearly horizontally, we are going to see that all the values from the output are going to be pretty much the same. But because if a line is completely horizontal, then you have a constant value on the y-axis, regardless of the values on the x-axis. Okay, so this is what's happening here. So what we can do is just, for example, move this, and then now we have a descending list, okay, because for the first value of the x-axis, we'll have the highest value for the y-axis. And that's what's happening here. And that being said, we can right-click and go to Graph Types, and for instance, get, for instance, a parabola. Okay, so for the parabola, the lowest value on axis, which is the one furthest right, has the highest value on the y-axis, which is 1. And it starts coming down, 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 down until the middle value, which is 0.5 on the x-axis, and it has the lowest value on the y-axis, which is 0. And then we start ascending again, okay? So this is what the graph mapper does. It changes the values depending on the graph type that we're using. So if we connect this to the radius, okay, we cannot see much is happening. Why is that? Because the values of the radius that we're putting are too small compared to the size of this vessel, or the height of this vessel. Okay, so these are the values of the radius that we're adding. Okay, so before connecting it to the radio, we need to remap those values. Okay, and what does this is a different, very useful component that we're going to teach on this tutorial. So if we go to, I believe it's here in maths, we have the remap numbers. Let's see what the remap number does. So what the remap numbers does, it's going to scale those values. Okay, we're going to make them bigger or smaller depending on what we need. But the relationship, the correlation on those values is going to be the same. Okay. So to use the remap numbers, we need to connect the values, which is pretty much the output of the graph mapper. I'm just going to connect it here. And then we need the source. Okay, for the source, what we need is to pretty much say the limits of this graph mapper. So I'm going to take this component that it's called bounds, and what it does, it gives us the bounds of a list, the higher number and the lowest number, the minimum and the maximum, and that's what I'm going to connect to source. And then the target is going to be the new numbers or the new boundaries that I want on that list, which is going to be closer to the radius that I need. Before, we had a slider connected to that radius that was around 160, and that was pretty much okay. So what I'm going to do is create a domain that it's close to 160, and then we can change it. So we're going to get the construct domain component, and I'm going to connect it to the target, not the source, but the target. And the domain start is going to be, I'm going to bring this same slider that I had for the radius, and I'm going to copy it to create the domain start and domain end. Then, of course, we can manipulate them as we see our shape. Okay, I'm going to put different values for each of them. Otherwise, we won't see anything at all. And then, let's drag this further right. And let's get another panel to see what's coming out of the remap numbers after this procedure that we have done. So what's going into the remap numbers, it's what's coming out of the graph mapper, which is this list. And then if we compare those lists, okay, depending on the position where we put the sliders, okay, on the construct domain. So the highest value of this list, or to the corresponding list, which is 1, it would be 160. And then each value has a correlation. Okay, it's basically escalated. Okay, so depending on the graph type, we will have a correlation or another one. And then we're going to connect this to the radius. And now we can see a little bit of the shape that we want. Okay, but we have a very small problem here. The small problem here is that I'm going to delete this and I'm going to delete this. So what's happening inside the circle component is that we are connecting two lists of data. Okay, we can see they are lists because those cables are double cables. Okay, that's because there is a list coming along them, and probably what is happening is those lists have different sizes. Okay, so different lengths. So what I'm gonna do is copy and paste this slider and paste it here, and we can see that those lists have different lengths. One is longer than the other one, so we need to make sure that those lists are exactly the same. To make sure of that, what we can do, the length of the first list, or the divide curve list, is being created by the count. So we can, if we change this number, we'll change the length of that list. And the other list is being changed by this slider here, which divides the range, or the domain of the range component. Okay, we need to make sure that those values are always the same. So what we're going to do is connect or use the same slider for both components, and that way we will always make sure that those lists are the same length. Okay, I'm going to delete this, I'm going to delete this, and now I'm going to create a loft along those circles. So if we create a loft here, now we can see pretty much the shape of our base, which we can easily change by changing our graph mapper. Okay, we can see that if we drag these white dots here, we can, depending on the shape of our graph, we will have a different kind of form or shape. So I'm going to change this graph type, for instance, and let's try something different. For instance, the sine function. If we drag the sine function, then we can create things like this, as easy as that. Okay, it's very, very easy. And we can always change the graph. We can change the bigger circle of the graph, or we can change this, the bigger or the smaller. We can change the height of that shape as easy as this. and so on. Okay, so on the next episode, we're going to carry out with this shape. We will continue adding things with the graph mapper. Thanks for watching.